So welcome to everyone to these episodes in the Saxenburg series of webinars that we're doing over this period. We're on season 1, which is consisting of 5 episodes. This is number 3. And just the usual housekeeping rules apply. We will be muting everybody while we're doing the presentation. Please post your questions in the chat, and then we will answer them if we have time and if we if we can. If not, I will just email some responses to questions tomorrow. And then we will also be posting, I think Chantal has already done it, we will be posting details of how to purchase the Saxenburg wines at the beginning and the end of the chat. Today it is my pleasure to welcome Fiona and Vincent Buhrer. They are the current custodians of Saxenburg, which is a family-owned farm and has been in the Buhrer family since 1989. So Fiona is going to start with some insights into the history of Saxenburg and the family behind Saxenburg. So where did it all begin, Fiona?
Okay, so Saxenburg has been around for a long time. I mean, it's been around since 1693, but I won't be talking about the history of Saxenburg, but I will be talking about the Buhrers, which is our surname, since we have taken other words over Saxenburg, and how we came to be here, in other words. So our family is originally Swiss, and we have been in the liquor wine industry for about 5 generations. So you understand that we have a deep-rooted love for the wine industry itself. And how South Africa came to be is that my father actually traveled through South Africa in the 1980s and developed a deep love for South Africa, and his brother studied at UCT, and so he came to visit him very often. And he always knew and dreamed of having a wine estate himself. So he saw, being in South Africa and tasting a lot of wines and seeing the terroir there, he saw a huge potential, because he told me that, you know, South Africa at the time wasn't open on an international level. So it was one of the most exciting countries to be part of, because there was just, you know, so much potential and so much change happening, and to be able to be part of that and to be part of the innovation that is happening, he thought that was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so in 1998, he traveled to South Africa looking for a wine estate, and he looked at loads, and none of them actually spoke to him. And on his way to the airport, he stopped at Saxenburg, and he said when he drove up Saxenburg, it was the feeling like you walk into this house that you're going to buy for the first time, you just feel at home. And he knew that this is going to be the farm. And then of course then once the terroir was looked at and they found out how amazing it was, everything came together, and there was no way around it. This had to be the farm for them. And then it actually took them a year, and then in 1989 they bought Saxenburg. And for the first 2 years, the family, so I'm one of 5 children, Vincent, of course, my brother, and then I have an older brother, Manuel, and 2 younger sisters, Stella and Rafaela. We stayed with my mother in Switzerland, and my father would travel back and forth to South Africa. But at the time, Saxenburg was in an extremely derelict state, and it required quite a big investment. And so the traveling back and forth was just not enough. And during the time, of course, my mother also joined him from time to time, and they really fell deeply in love with the country. And so they decided to, you know, move all of us over. And so in 91, the whole family moved to South Africa. And I would say the 90s consisted mostly of replanting, because actually when Saxenburg was bought, it was predominantly Chenin Blanc and Cinsault and Riesling that were planted on Saxenburg. And so my parents did not believe in following trend. They really already believed in terroir. And so they looked at the terroir at Saxenburg, and they, you know, what is viable to plant and what makes sense. And that's where Shiraz was born. So for the people that would know, in the beginning of the 90s, Shiraz was definitely not the wine to plant, but they decided that was going to be their main varietal, especially because the top of Saxenburg is a decomposed granite field. So Shiraz would strive there. So they planted Shiraz, and then Cab as their second biggest varietal, and then of course Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay and the other grape varietals that you know have all been planted in the 90s. So the 90s was all about planting Saxenburg and redoing the manor house, etc., which were all at the time really in a derelict state. And then in 89, actually, my father did the first vintage himself. He was the winemaker at Saxenburg. And then Van Rensburg joined, and he did a vintage at Saxenburg. And then in 91, of course, Nico van der Merwe joined. And Saxenburg was really unknown at the time. And then in 91, Saxenburg won 5 double golds, the Veritas Award, and they won the General Smuts Award. And they that catapulted Saxenburg like onto the map, and people knew who the farm was. And of course, for my parents, extremely encouraging. And so they wanted to continue building the brand during that time. And I would say then in 98, they created one of the first icon wines in South Africa, which is Saxenburg Zero Select. And they did it with the Shiraz because over the 90s, I would say the Shiraz is what got the most recognition in South Africa, our Saxenburg Shiraz. It was always rated amongst the top Shirazes. It got 5 stars on the John Platter multiple times. It won Best Essay Shiraz. So Saxenburg was really known for the Shiraz. So that's why the 98, it was also the Triple S that then came to life. And then in the 2000s, I would say they really concentrated on expanding internationally because, at that time, then the international market was open and people were hungry for South African wine. And so they concentrated on expanding that. And then in 2007, the 2003 Cab won at the IWC Best Cab in the World. And so, of course, that then put them onto an international recognition. So they had both home and international, and I would say they put the bar very high for Vincent and myself to have future achievements along that way. But I would say that is a kind of a brief history of how Saxenburg came to be under my parents.
It's always interesting to hear the story. I have heard your father say the story as well, so it's always interesting. But yeah, so when did you begin your? Sorry.
I said, yes, I still love listening to hear him talk about it. Always new things come up.
Exactly. When did you begin your active role at Saxenburg? How has that changed over the years?
So my active role started at Saxenburg, I would say 10 years ago. Actually, my father was not at all pushing any of us 5 children to go in the wine industry. My father very much believes that you have to follow your own path. I think he really did. My grandfather thought he was completely bonkers going to South Africa in 89, and it still turned out amazing for him. So I think he believed in the same kind of thing for his children, that they should follow their way. So at the time, none of us had planned to take over Saxenburg. Manuel, my oldest brother, is actually the only one who studied to become a winemaker, but he didn't end up going into the wine industry. And I was in South Africa at the time because we had moved away and I was studying and working abroad. And I'd moved back to South Africa for a completely different project. And I asked, and living back on Saxenburg, I have such a deep-rooted love for Saxenburg because I spent this amazing, idyllic childhood with my brothers and sisters there. But of course, you see it from a different point of view when you're an adult. And so the wine industry had completely changed, I think, when I came back from what my parents experienced in the 90s. I mean, I think my father at one point said 6 months after harvest, they had sold all of their wine and had nothing more to sell because, there was not as much competition and there was a different demand at the time. So, when I returned, the wine industry had completely changed in the fact that as well that there were hundreds of wine farms producing incredible wine, beautiful wine farms that I admire and love. And so the competition had shifted and the family had not been on Saxenburg as much during that time. So for me, there was this challenge and I asked my father, can I join? And so he said, well, okay, you can start off as a rep in the Western Cape. And I thought I'd do like a 6-month stint. And I started off repping in the Western Cape. And 6 months you know, my naivete, I thought like I can change everything in 6 months. Turns out that didn't work out that way. And so I of course stayed on longer, and then I started taking over. I grew in taking over the Johannesburg market as a rep there, and then I took over the national South African market, and from that I grew into taking over the international market. And from that, actually 4 years ago, Vincent and I took over the reins of Saxenburg. But I don't want this to sound cliche or cheesy anyway, but I think, you know, Saxenburg for me it's not really a job as such. It's really a passion. Like, I have a deep rooted love for wine, but especially for Saxenburg. And so I just grew with it, and I love the challenges, and I love the farm, and I love working with Vincent. So that's how I would say come to be here. That's my role now.
And so living on the farm and growing up on the farm must have created some wonderful experiences. I have heard some of the stories and wonderful memories, and you must have had amazing experiences. But would you like to share what your favorite memory of growing up on the farm is?
I think there are so many, and some of them I probably shouldn't share because my parents don't even know about it. And if they're listening in, they're going to be very worried. But I would say, I think one memory is when we first moved to Saxenburg. We were all living in the manor house, and we were all 5 children sharing one room because it had to be completely renovated. And there were loads of guinea fowls on the farm. And coming from Switzerland, we'd never seen guinea fowls, so we were extremely taken back by these animals. And having a little hunting instinct, we would sit up at night and wait till our parents were asleep, and then get out our Swiss pocket knives. We're like 5, 6 years old, and jump out of the window and run after these guinea fowls. But actually, no guinea fowl was ever hurt in the process. I only think our pride was hurt because we would fail every night. But I just vividly remember that, and I think the bond it created. And now, obviously, we love our guinea fowls, and we would do everything to preserve them.
And hence then also the reason why guinea fowls became part of the story of Saxenburg.
Yeah, as you know, guinea fowls are everywhere.
Yes, exactly. So on to Vincent, and what is your fondest childhood memory?
Well, firstly, I just wanted to, again, just take a quick second and welcome everyone here and just thank you. Glad to see that everyone's keeping well, many of you with a glass of wine. It's very, very nice to have you here. We never thought a few weeks ago that this could be quite as intimate and quite as personal to actually have a video conference and engage with so many people that we either work with or that consume our wine. So we are absolutely delighted to have you here, and we hope that this will be the beginning of a really interesting journey. So also just throughout, obviously feel completely free to ask questions as we go along. I think as Fiona said, there's so many memories. I think when you grow up on a farm, especially being here now during lockdown, you sort of realize the incredible fortune of being in nature, being outdoors, and it's a privilege you certainly don't take for granted, but you're grateful for every day. And it's made my lockdown quite a bit easier also during the process, to be honest. So that's a lovely thing. We've always been very outdoorsy as siblings. As Fiona said, there are 5 of us. As a family, we're all great riders. We love riding. All of us love horses and dogs. And so I would say that one of my fondest memories by far was we used to, on a Sunday, our father was very friendly with the then owner of Nietlingshof, which is a farm just down the road. It takes you 10 minutes by car, but if you take the back roads across the vineyards, it took us 2.5 hours. And so as a child, waking up in the morning, saddling your own horse, getting on with your siblings, and then just going, across the vineyards, seeing the dikers and seeing the guinea fowl. It was a far cry from where we were in the concrete jungle of Switzerland. So it was a very, very fond memory to spend the time just out there and doing that. And then we'd go there, we'd have lunch, and then we'd saddle up again afterwards and ride back again. And that was a day well spent. So I would say that is definitely top ranking memory for me.
Oh, wow. Okay. And when did you begin your active role at Saxenburg?
It's funny actually, because when I go back to those days of childhood, you know, as a child, you usually take things for granted. You look at your surroundings and you never quite ask yourself the questions, how did this all happen? How is this all coming together? And so as a child growing up, you know, we moved from one house to another, to a bigger house. There would be a lot of containers. Then all of a sudden there'd be a cellar, there'd be more vineyards, there'd be more people. And you just take a lot of these things for granted. And I think it takes time and experience to sort of understand what the land actually means. And our philosophy has always been that you're only custodians of a land passing by. And so every decision you make is, we consider these internally sort of generational plans. So whatever, you know, Fiona and I do now is for the next generation and the one after that. And equally, whatever our parents did was to a great extent for us. And so you kind of pave the way. But as a child, I have to be honest, I love being outdoors and I loved wine. I started nibbling on the first glass of wine at, young age of 14 or 15, whatever it was, and grew more fond of it as the years went by. But as a young man, after university, obviously, as Fiona, I went back and I studied in the UK. My focus was on law and marketing and languages. And the notion of wine was very far removed from me. And I decided, like many of us in those days, to either go into consulting or banking. And I ended up going into banking. I was always fascinated by the concept of managing money and how, you know, different people look at managing their assets and managing their wealth, whatever that might be. And after about 2 years, I realized that this was not at all for me. I was not gaining anything. The bank certainly wasn't gaining anything from me. So I decided to venture off into wine. And at the time, there was an opportunity with another family business of ours, which is in wine trading. And it was particularly interesting to me because of the opportunity to travel. I just, lived in London for 2 years doing my banking, and here was an opportunity to travel mostly to the Asian countries. We were working a lot in Vietnam and Japan and China. And so I jumped at the opportunity, and I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And it was fascinating to kind of dive into the deep end of selling wine, and often it's almost good to start that way around, because often what you find is that if you start on the very creative side in the vineyard and, you know, you pour your heart and soul into something, and then you have to go out and sell it only to be shut down, can be very, very daunting and very difficult. Whereas if you start on the selling side and then work your way backwards, you have a little taste of the bitterness that can sometimes await you out there. And so after that, after those 4 years, I decided to move back to South Africa as well. And I had always been incredibly in love with this country. You know, this is home, and being on the farm. And then one thing led to another. You know, Fiona had been fairly well established here already. And as I had been in sales already, I continued that, but obviously for Saxenburg. And then little by little went into the more strategic side of things. And so as Fiona said, you know, the years went by and we worked on the farm. Our parents were still very much part of the business. And as our father always said to us, he said the most difficult thing is to watch your children make mistakes and not stop them in the process. And it's a notion you'll only understand when you have your own children. Now, Fiona will probably understand this better than me. I'm still in the process of it, but Fiona already has 2 of her own. So it's something that makes a lot of sense today, and they were always very good. I think when you have a family business and there is a generational change, I think there can always be an element of reluctance, an element of fear. You know, you spent your life building something only to hand it over. But I must say that I think once we got to a point where we had a good idea of what we wanted to do, both our parents were quite happy, at least towards us, to kind of step back and watch us fail. And so we did. And we certainly had a lot of stumbling blocks along the way. And here we go now. You know, it's a very young journey. We're extremely excited. We have taken over the management and the operational side of running the estate 4 years ago, and we're incredibly excited about the journey and what lies ahead. So, I mean, in a nutshell, that's how I got into it.
Okay, and that leads perfectly onto my next question, of course, and that's the current situation at Saxenburg, but more importantly, really what the future is and what the future holds for, well, the farm, the wines, and of course the legacy.
I mean, look, the current situation, obviously, I'm assuming you're not asking COVID-19 sort of measures that we've had to take. No, current situation, I think it's an incredibly bar COVID, obviously, it's an incredibly exciting time, probably the most incredibly exciting time to be in the wine industry in South Africa at the moment. For many reasons. Our point of view, obviously, from where we stand from a Saxenburg point of view, and I think where the world is moving, where consumers are moving, and the whole way that the sort of supply chain has changed also in the process, certainly in our industry. So it's, you know, a couple of years ago when we obviously were in the process of trying to convince our parents that we were now ready to take this over and for them to step back, we had to put a vision and a strategy in place. And I think your first impulse very often, especially as a young man, maybe less so for Fiona, was probably the wiser one sort of holding me back on a lot of these things that we would, you know, obviously make joint decisions on, is that you have a tendency to change a lot of things. You know, your first impulse is to change everything and put your own stamp on everything. And we were very much cautioned away for that. And whether we had to be or not is besides the point. But what we decided on very quickly was to assess the brand as it is, assess the farm as it is. And obviously, we were in a very lucky position to take over a very well-established farm that is in many ways in an extremely unique location, beautiful location. And we could spend an entire webinar just talking about the terroir here at Saxenburg and what makes it so multifaceted and unique. But it was more just kind of understanding what we were doing really well at the time, what we were doing well and where we were truly lacking. And there were a lot of things, and there continue to be plenty of things that we lack in. But obviously that sets the challenge for every other day. So that's the exciting bit. And we identified 3 core pillars. The first one was the vineyard. First vines, as Fiona said, most of the vineyard was planted between 1990, 1991 and 1993. And then there was a second big wave between 2002 and 2004. And the planting in those days was very much done based on the vision that Syrah was going to be great in this area. And that is why it also represents 60% of our total production today. So when looking at the vineyard, we had to address a couple of things. A was our viticulture up to standard, because it is our absolute belief that the wine is made in the vineyard. Dirk, who you've seen the last couple of webinars as well, he joined us late last year. And I'm very happy to say, not because I think he's on this call as well, I'm assuming he's on this call.
He is.
He's taken like a duck to water on this venture as well, because he understands the importance of viticulture, and I think it might be something that many winemakers are sometimes forgetting a little bit. So that was important. Wine is made in the vineyard, and that's why both viticulturists and winemakers have to spend a lot of time there. The second thing was we started introducing different types of very straightforward technology. So whether it was probes in the ground to measure the soil moisture, whether it was using drone footage and satellite footage to analyze the photosynthetic process in the vines themselves, and a number of other things, just to kind of understand what stress level is the vineyard at and how can we assist it during the tougher growing season. Or the tougher vintages. And then secondly, as most of you will know, or thirdly, I should say, as most of you will know, South Africa has, especially during the rush in the 90s, a lot of the nurseries were supplying wineries, unfortunately, with less than up to standard viticultural material and plant material, and it led to a great extent also to a big problem we have today, which is leaf roll in the vineyard. Unfortunately, Saxenburg wasn't spared from that. So we certainly do have vineyards that are infected as well. And what we started just over 10 years ago was replanting those vineyards. But the opportunity that we saw with that was that it gave us a chance to replant and look at 3 criteria. The first was looking back on 25 years of viticultural data and harvest data and wine data, what sites were producing particularly well for what varieties, what clones were producing particularly well. Now, to anyone that's visited Saxenburg, the farm is on a hill, so we have 360 degrees of exposure towards False Bay behind me, and obviously also towards Franschhoek, towards the other side. So what that gives us is a huge complexity in terms of sites. And so where do we pick the new sites for where we're going to plant these varietals? And thirdly, clones, if I haven't mentioned that already. Clones were very important because certainly up until the 90s, a lot of the plant material that was brought into the country were higher yielding clones. And so what we wanted to do is obviously quality clones, mixing qualities. For those, and that were on last week's session, Dirk briefly alluded to it as well. The big secret here for us, all of our entire private collection is monocépage, so single varietal wines. But the blending of those single varietal wines comes from sometimes 5, 10, 15 different sites and parcels and sites within those parcels. So that is the complexity of the vineyard. And then secondly it was team, without a doubt. So I think for Fiona and I, it was we needed people that we could relate to, that spoke our language, that would understand the vision that we had, and people that were truly passionate, well beyond just receiving a paycheck at the end of the month, as important as that is to anyone, probably more now so than ever. But someone who could really buy into the vision, and we wanted people that weren't there solely for the benefit of their own glorification, but which can often be the case with winemakers. I'm not picking on you, Dirk, at all, but it can be. And so, for us, the philosophy here is Saxenburg is bigger than any single person. Saxenburg is the vision. Saxenburg is the philosophy. And so that was the team we were looking for. And we're absolutely delighted to have that team surround us, and it makes this journey so much nicer for us. And then lastly, and this is probably the biggest aspect of it, was the consumer and how the journey to this consumer was going to be built. When I said before that the wine industry has probably never been more exciting, is that the way that we look at it, and I know that someone else who's dear to me is on this call today, is Nicolo, my partner at Port to Port, and also the visionary founder behind Port to Port. For those who know the brand, it's an online wine marketplace based here in South Africa, and we recently opened an office as well in the UK. But we can talk more about that on another webinar. He introduced me a great extent to what that customer journey could look like, and obviously what has happened is that the last 200 years. Wineries would usually grow and market and sell wine in a very similar fashion. What has happened through technology is that people now have complete transparency. They have access to the kind of data that was never available before. And they are now, as much as we may be disconnected at times, looking for closer connection to the brands and the producers that they are consuming products and services from. And so that was definitely something that we spent a lot of time, and we continue to spend. It may be our biggest challenge yet, the most time looking at. So to understand what that consumer looks like and how we can ready ourselves as a brand to make sure that we can satisfy their every need. These consumers, both Fiona and I are millennials, so we like to think that we understand more and more the millennial mindset. These are people that are highly connected, very impatient. when it comes to pretty much everything. And so if we want to build their trust and their their loyalty rather, we must show them that we understand them and that we're ready to serve them. The whole sort of logistical chain behind that is almost a webinar in itself, but to put it in a nutshell, it is our firm belief that already now and in the coming years, the producer will have an opportunity to speak directly to the consumer on many, many more levels than we ever have in the past. I think the consumers are craving that proximity, as we said, and I think the producers who have understood that they need to be the only custodians of their brand now have understood how to tell that story. And so we believe that if you bring the two together, that's the way to create fireworks. So it's really the distribution that we're looking at. That's what we see for the future. And those, I would say, are the three big pillars. There's plenty more stuff, obviously, but those are the three sort of fundamental pillars.
A lot to take in, and a lot of change that I think is happening. There are one or two questions. I think you've touched on the answers to them as you've been speaking, but the one is about the wine styles of Saxenburg. Maybe from your point of view, you can just talk about that. What is the future going to look for the wine of Saxenburg?
Do you mind? Should I go, Fiona? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think. This is a very good question because it's one that we have one very simple answer to. I think Saxenburg will always remain true to the style that it has, which is to express its terroir without a doubt. But does that have to be typically Stellenbosch? Not necessarily, because again, we're in a very unique place that might express so many different locations. The way that the wines would be expressed and the style between the 90s and the 2000s, when wines were doing very well, Saxenburg wines were doing very well, both locally and abroad, is something that we still enjoy drinking, but very different not very different, but somewhat different to the vision that Fiona and I have. And I would say the Saxenburg team as a collective. The wines that and you will have heard this a lot, but the wines that we believe in today are wines that express character and grace and elegance, not through necessarily being overly sort of dense or pungent or opulent, but rather wines that express elegance through perfect integration, through optimal picking in the vineyard, through perfect blending in the cellar. So we're looking at wines that are, as expressive, if not more expressive, in a more delicate way. And this change has started happening about 3 years ago. We've been very lucky. The 17, the 19 vintage were very, very strong vintages for us. And the 2020 vintage, and not to sound like a broken record on this webinars, but is turning out to be absolutely extraordinary. So I think we have right now in our hands a cellar full of wine with wonderful wines that we can hopefully quite easily execute that sort of style with.
Great. I'm not sure if Fiona would like to add anything to that.
Vincent, you rounded that pretty nicely. So I think Vincent and I share a vision when it comes to the style of wine that we're working towards, and especially, of course, also with Dirk. So I think you put that very well. We're very, also, I would say, very terroir focused. We really work with what Saxenburg has to offer, and that's what we want to bring into the bottle and into the wine.
Great. I'm not sure if you would like to maybe add one or two more, or another comment from either one of you. Just a final comment. We'll be able to wrap it up.
I see there are a number of questions. Are there any other questions? Let's address questions.
Okay. So the last one that's come in is from Louis, and it's saying about the global trend of the younger generation drinking less wine, and your comments on that. Baby boomers.
That the baby boomers are drinking less wine?
Less wine per capita than the older generations.
I think one big thing here is that probably they are drinking less wine, but everybody started off drinking less wine. I think with what we have nowadays, they're drinking more informed. We have so much access to knowledge nowadays. I mean, how often, well, around me, people, the moment they see a wine, they take out their phone, they Vivino it, and they have instant information. Nowadays, when you go online buying, let's take Port to Port, for example, you go on there, you get an exact knowledge, somebody will inform you about the wine. So you're not going in anymore and you're buying to get drunk, if I can say it like that, but you're buying more informed to enjoy. So actually, I think that works out as a positive for us when it comes to that.
I think just to add on to that, I think they're obviously from a business point of view. I mean, to simplify things, as a winery, you really have two options. You either produce there are options in between, but these are the two extreme options. You either produce a lot of wine and you aim at the lower market. And now just bear in mind that in South Africa, anything over 90 or 100 rand is already considered very premium. The average wine sits far below 90 rand retail, or you have the choice to focus on quality and brand. And 30 years, and that has always been our motto, has always been our philosophy. So what probably the first thing that will help us is the close relationship we keep with partners. If we produce 300,000 bottles a year, if we have those close relationships and we do our homework, it shouldn't affect our own bottom line too much. The second thing to look at is the second statistic around what you're saying, which is, yes, people are drinking less wine. There is no doubt about that. But if you look at the overall revenue on wine, it's actually up. It's because, as Fiona said, they are drinking more informed and often better quality and more expensive wines. An example in that is I spend a lot of time in London. The UK is a big market for us. There's one fantastic wine store in South Kensington, which is very supportive of South African wines. It's run by a master of wine called Greg Sherwood, called Hanford Wines. And he specializes in premium South African wines. His story is always the same. 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago, rather, sorry, it was, all South African wines were 90% of his selection was under £15 retail. Today, 90% of his selection is over £25 retail of South African wines. And he says, in terms of actual revenue, he's never done better on South African wines. So, that is luckily the category that we fall in as well. So for us, as Fiona said, probably a good turn of events.
And there's one other question about technology in the winemaking process. Is winemaking in danger of losing the art and of winemaking? Do you have an answer for that?
Definitely not at Saxenburg. You're welcome to come and visit the cellar at any time. There are two versions of truth here. The first one is it is incredibly expensive to buy all of this equipment, which is probably the biggest reason that's kept us from doing it. So you'll still find us punching down manually and doing 90% of the labor manually. So there is absolutely no risk here at Saxenburg. What you find in the industry and speaking to peers and speaking to other winemakers, and be interesting to Derek at some stage obviously give his opinion on that, who's far more qualified. Neither Fiona or I are qualified enologists or viticulturalists, but the conversation that comes up is that people that often have access to the most sophisticated and highly technologically equipped cellars will revert back in many ways to older practices, to older technologies and older equipment as well in the winemaking process. So I would say at this stage there is not too much worry around that for us. Certainly not in our book, no.
Yeah, I would say nearly the opposite. If anything, the winemaking process is more about nowadays, even more about being less interfering with the wine and letting the wine find its own way kind of in the cellar. So if technology, if anything, then it's just, I would say, being used from us as well as being more environmentally friendly. So as Vincent was saying, that we have the stems in the vineyard to really see how much rain is needed. Do we need to put irrigation, become, less spraying, putting compost out that we make ourselves. So from that point of view, I would say you use technology more. But I would say from a winemaking process, well, we definitely are more of a laid back, hands off kind of approach.
Great. Well, I don't see any other new ones that have come in. There's a question about what are your favorite wines? What do you? No, I'm talking about which one of the Saxenburg.
Okay, you go, Fiona.
Well, at Saxenburg, my favorite wine is probably going to be the Shiraz, and I'm not saying that because we are that's the one we're going for. It's just I love our Shiraz.
Vincent?
No, mine changes all the time. I have a tendency to drink one wine for a long time and then almost get a little bit bored, not bored of it, but want to move on to something else. And so I kind of move between the ranges. I just picked up, sorry, I don't know how we're doing for time, Kay, but I picked up in that question before about wine styles. There was one important aspect in that question which was asked, which was how much do you compromise the style of your wine to be reflective of what the Saxenburg style should be, and how much it should be reflective of what the market would consider to be a great wine? And I think that's a great question, because that's something that a lot of producers wrestle with, is to what extent can you compromise what you do just to appease, not just to appease, but to make sure that the consumer really likes your product, because ultimately you'll be selling your soul to the devil. If you follow trends, in our experience, you can never win. You can absolutely never win. But I think the answer to that is that the Saxenburg style obviously also changes. There isn't one style to what it is. And it wasn't the same in the 90s or the 2000s and now and in 50 years from now, because obviously consumers change, trends change, winemaking techniques and styles change, climate change influences what we do in the vineyard and the grapes that we are allowed to pick. So I think the style that we want to create is always one that is very respective of the grape that we pick in the vineyard and is very expressive of that. And I guess then it's down to us and the marketing and the sales team to do their job and to sell it as best they can. But that is one thing we wouldn't compromise on. So I hope that gives a bit more overview on that.
Correct.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fiona, would you like to add a last? No,
I would just like to thank everybody for joining. It's really a privilege for us to be speaking to you and to share some of our Saxenburg love, history, passion, future, and yes, our values, and create our own Saxenburg moments with you. So thank you very much.
Yes, so thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. Thank you for me as well. This was really fun, and I hope we get to do lots more of this. And if you have any more questions, please just email Kerry, obviously. Stay safe, and let's hope that the sanity of our government, we don't make these things political, but let's hope that soon we'll be able to supply everyone with wine again and just go about our business that we are very passionate about. So yeah, we raise a glass to you all. Cheers. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
So just a couple of last closing stories. Thank you all for joining us. Please follow our YouTube channel if you would like to see any of the other videos and recordings that we have done over the past few weeks. Next time we'll be talking to Dirk again, and that's about how long do we wait and the patience and the luxury of time. I'll send out the invitation again next week early. To purchase any of the wines, Chantal has said at the beginning and the end of the chat, but you can also direct message us or email me any orders. Then this week, for the first time, we have included a prize draw, which is for a magnum of private collection. And so as not for it to be at all coming from me, who maybe knows quite a lot of you. It comes from Dirk. He chose the winning name out of the hat, and that magnum will go to Chantal Daniel. So congratulations. We'll deliver it to you as soon as we possibly can. And then we look forward to welcoming you to the next episode. And cheers to you all. See you next week.
Congratulations, Chantal. Enjoy it. Bye.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.